Welcome back to Dialogue on Public Issues. I'm John Chowning, host with Campbellsville University. Today I'm very pleased to be interviewing a gentleman by the name of Dr. Randel Everett, the head of an organization called the 21st Century Wilberforce Initiative originally. Now it goes by 2021 Wilberforce. Dr. Everett, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Channing. Good to be here. It's an honor.
Tell us a little bit about your personal background and experience, and then we'll delve into the mission of 21 Wilberforce.
Well, I've had the privilege of spending several decades as a pastor, as a Baptist pastor. I've been in Texas and Arkansas and Florida and Virginia. Been pastor of some wonderful congregations, and I've had some rich experiences there. When we were living in the D.C. area, I was at Columbia Baptist Church in Falls Church, Virginia. We started a Baptist seminary there. It was a kind of a grassroots effort. There's some wonderful seminaries already in D.C., but there was none from a Baptist perspective. And so we wanted to bring that to fruition, to be a part of the consortium, the Washington Consortium there. Well, we couldn't afford a real president, so I became the president there. I resigned to the church and became the president for 8 years until it got full accreditation. And that was a wonderful experience. I thought I'd never be a denominational employee, but Texas Baptist called me back out of Virginia and asked me to be the executive director of Texas Baptist, and I had the privilege of doing that. Wonderful network of churches and universities and schools. So a very similar background, but also diverse and different kinds of roles. I've been a volunteer partner with the Baptist World Alliance for 25 years, and that's what really played a big role in my helping to start the 21 Wilberforce, because of seeing the increased religious persecution around the world.
What is the mission of 21 Wilberforce, and when was it established, and who were some of the founding members of this organization?
We're 6 years old, almost to the date, and it started out with a couple of phone calls and a visit from unlikely sources. I was a pastor down at First Baptist Church in Midland, Texas, and I got a call from Congressman Frank Wolf, and I had known of him when I was in the D.C. area, and he called and said, religious persecution is worse than it's ever been. And he said, what's it going to take to wake up the church in America? And well, actually, first of all, he called and said, do you have a few minutes to talk? I said, this is Frank Wolf. I said, as in Congressman Frank Wolf? And he said, yes. And I said, well, let me pull over. I was at a really nice restaurant, Chick-fil-A, and so pulled over to the parking lot, and we talked for 30 minutes. And that's when he first started talking to me about the need for this. There is a Jewish attorney in D.C., Michael Horowitz, a very prominent attorney. And Michael has probably done more for persecuted Christians than any Christian leader that I know. And so Michael and his wife, Deborah, who is a physician, they actually came to our house in Midland, Texas, and they spent 4 nights with us. So for 5 days, Michael kept saying to me why we needed to be involved in something new. And grew out of the conversation between Michael and Congressman Wolf over the next few months, and a lot of prayer. And we just recognized that the church in the West needs to get engaged in promoting religious freedom, but also in defending those victims of religious persecution. We recognized that we needed to have our offices in the D.C. area because so much happens there. But I had lived in D.C., and my main network was Texas after being executive director of Texas Baptist. And so I chose to stay here. For a while, we had an apartment there, but our offices are actually in the same building with the Baptist World Alliance. And that's where most of our staff, we still have a small staff, but most of our staff are there in that building. And I go back and forth. And of course, we do international travel as well. Your question, what we do is, I think in a positive way, we promote religious freedom for people of all faiths and even people of no faith around the world. We feel like everyone in the world should have the freedom of their own beliefs, faith, and speech. But on the negative part of that, religious persecution is just increasing in unexpected ways globally. And so we try to become a voice for those who are facing religious persecution from all faith backgrounds. Of course, we are a Christian organization, so most of our networks are Christians, but within that network, we're Christians who believe in the basic right of religious freedom for all folks.
Certainly, you mentioned Mr. Horowitz and also former Congressman Wolf, two of the great pioneers in this area of concern in terms of religious liberty and the persecution of the church. Both of those gentlemen very, very well known. Now, tell us about the person for whom the organization was named. What was his legacy, and why was the decision made to use his name?
Well, it was interesting. When Michael and Frank and I were talking about a new organization, we disagreed on a lot of things, but the thing that we never disagreed on was the name. I mean, William Wilberforce was a hero for each of us. And so the interesting thing about William Wilberforce, he was a parliamentarian in 18th, 19th century England. And he was elected to Parliament when I think he's like 21 years old, a very young parliamentarian. He really had what he called a great change in his life, which was, I would say that was when he was born again. I mean, he was a Christian by heritage, but he had a dramatic change in his life when he was about 24, 25 years old. He had one of the most prominent seats in Parliament in the House of Commons. He was a celebrity around the country. William Pitt was the young prime minister who was one of his best friends. He belonged to 5 social clubs in London and came from a very wealthy family. He had everything that should make a person happy, we would think, along those lines. And yet there was a real emptiness and hunger and kind of a desperation in his life. And he and Isaac Milner, a brilliant academician, studied through the Greek New Testament together. And studying through the Greek New Testament, he really made a total commitment of his life to Christ. John Newton, who wrote the book, the hymn Amazing Grace, had been somewhat of a mentor to him when he was young, living in Wimbledon with his aunt and uncle. And then Newton was the one that he turned to when he had this great change in his life. Wilberforce went to him thinking that Newton would say, well, you need to leave Parliament and become a preacher. But Newton didn't say that. He said, stay where you are, and serve Christ there. And so God gave him a burden for slaves. And slavery was just an acceptable part of the economic fabric of not only England, but the world. And to challenge slavery was an impossible task. And yet God burdened William Wilberforce that slaves are people, men and women and children created in the image and likeness of God, and sons and daughters of God. And so he spent the rest of his life fighting for abolition of slavery. 3 days before he died, they abolished slavery in England. So he was a mentor for us. I mean, God used him to really change the world. Not just him, but a number of other people were on that track and journey with him. His philosophy of change was top down, bottom up. And so that's the philosophy that we undertook. Top down, you've got to change laws. You've got to change constitutions. You've got to change unjust systems that are in place if you're going to have true equality and if it's going to survive you. And so we saw him as a parliamentarian working really hard to change it from top down. But you've also got to have a grassroots network. And so people like Hannah More, who wrote dramas and novels and plays and pamphlets, began to change the narrative of what was really happening among these slaves and the horrendous situations that they were in. And so they had to change the hearts and minds of the people. So that's what we adopted. We adopted him as our mentor and as our strategy. And from day one, we've tried to, how do you be an advocate, an influencer of the influential, but yet at the same time, how do you go right out into the grassroots networks of churches and and other faith groups and civic organizations to help them to understand why religious freedom is everyone's right and how people do better in scenarios where there is religious freedom.
Don't you think it's fair, Dr. Everett, to say that William Wilberforce not only dedicated his life and his financial resources, but even his health, his entire life was he really gave everything he had into the pursuit of the abolition of the slave trade.
Absolutely. Physically, I mean, he was a small guy anyway. He was probably 5'3" or 4", and at one time he was so ill he was below 100 pounds, and so I think the enormity of the task, and also his burden for slaves, and the criticism that, if you're going to take on an issue like unjust laws, especially when the economy is based on that, you're going to have a lot of criticism and a lot of opposition. And that's a great point, John, that it cost him physically to lead this charge.
Now, what are some of the core programs currently being pursued by 21 Wilberforce?
Well, God just opened up some incredible opportunities for us. There's an International Religious Freedom Roundtable in D.C. that has about 200 members from a lot of different faith groups and civic organizations around the area of religious freedom. And our little team has a very prominent role in that. Nathan Weingart on our staff is the vice president or vice chair. During COVID, they were not able to meet in face-to-face, and so they actually meet every week on our site. And I'd encourage people to go to the site. It's just it's our Freedom Center. It's a digital platform, and it's the number 21wfreedom.center. So if you just go to that site, 21wfreedom.center, we host the meeting for the roundtable there. It has a lot of helpful information there too. For instance, you can access the constitutions of about 150 countries. The whole site can be translated by touching a button. It can be translated into probably over 120 languages. So if someone in Iran wants to read what their constitution has to say about religious freedom, you can go to their constitution, find it in Farsi, click on religious freedom, and everything will pop up about what their constitution has to say about that. So we were very involved in the roundtable. God has given us access to the people in the State Department. Ambassador Brownback is the U.S. Ambassador for International Religious Freedom. We work very closely with him, and he does with our organization. We're now legally a part of the Baptist World Alliance, and so the BWA is in 126 different countries, and that gives us that grassroots network that we wanted to bring this about. We can't bring religious freedom to these countries, but there are some wonderful things about religious freedom that are already happening, throughout the world. So we're trying to identify those and make their resources accessible so that groups can relate to one another. We strongly believe, John, in collaboration. I was kind of amused that there was actually competition among organizations fighting for religious freedom. And I think, it's lighthouses aren't in competition with each other. We're not going to overserve the persecuted church, and so we really need to collaborate. And so that's through the BWA. We're building this grassroots network, and so we're able to defend those who are being persecuted. Within 2 weeks of our establishment, we were literally in Iraq. Before we had our computer system set up, before our phones were set up, Congressman Wolf, he left Congress, joined our staff, and he said, if we're going to talk about religious persecution, we need to go to Iraq. And I said, is that a community in Virginia? I didn't want to go to Iraq. But literally, we were standing behind sandbags 1.5 miles from ISIS with the Kurdish generals, where we went to see for ourselves and hear for ourselves what ISIS had done in the Nineveh Plains. And we came back and we said, this is genocide. It's genocide not only against the Christians, but also against the Yazidis and some of the other religious minorities in Iraq. And so for a year, we worked with Congress to recognize that this was genocide. And finally, Congress did declare that it was genocide. And that causes a lot of legal and even financial opportunities for people who find themselves there. So it gives us a chance to defend. We went to Nigeria. The year before we went to Nigeria, not a single bill or resolution talked about the persecution in Nigeria and the U.S. House. We spent $35,000 for security. We went all over the Middle Belt and up in the northern part of Nigeria. We documented these atrocities that were unbelievable. About 5 million people have been displaced from their homes. Churches, villages burned to the ground. Women and children killed in their beds. And this was a lot of it was the work of Boko Haram, and some of it was the work of some Fulani militants that came up. And so we came back and we began to make reports on that. And now Nigeria is recognized as a country of real concern and begin to highlight that. So sometimes we do it kind of on a global scale, a national scale, like Nigeria or Iraq. But other times it's personal. Recently, we learned of a pastor in Nepal that was put in prison because of these new anti-proselytizing laws. So we brought it to the round table. First, our staff interviewed these people in Nepal to find exactly what happened, to document it. Then we introduced them by Zoom and let them tell their story. And since then, this pastor is out of prison, but he's also, several other groups came in and provided funding for him for his legal defense, and we even took it to the UN. Two of our staff hold UN representation from the BWA, and so able to take it to the UN and highlight so that the countries like Nepal can't get by with this. So we can do it on a massive schedule, like in Nigeria or Iraq, or personal one, like the situation in Nepal. Not many people know this, but when Andrew Brunson, the Presbyterian missionary in Turkey, was put in prison, the Presbyterians came to our office first and said, "What do we do? And how can we get him out of prison?" And so we joined with many other groups over 2-year periods of time to get him out. And so we defend, but we also train trainers, especially emerging leaders. I wish I had time to go into all of that, but of course I don't. But a great opportunity for university students, and at Campbellsville, it'd be wonderful to strengthen that partnership. We have these university students that some of them end up coming as our interns. We've created 2 fellowships that they can, after they graduate, they can experience for a year. We just had a practicum with 8 university students from various universities that we took them through how to actually bring about a bill. Or so training trainers. We've trained 4,500 human rights lawyers and pastors in China and Ethiopia and Nigeria and Sudan and Syria that go through this leadership training, and they actually get a certificate from Dallas Baptist University that go through that. We're having a conference in Baylor, February 15th and 16th. So maybe one of these days we could do one of these conferences in Campbellsville University as well. We actually televised one, and we created 13 30-minute programs that were translated and broadcast in Iran over satellite television, and they estimated 6 million Iranians viewed all or some of these 13-minute programs on transformational leadership, weaving in that Jesus is the ultimate transformational leader. So training is a big part of what we do.
What would you share as some of the most egregious examples of religious persecution? And you have touched on a couple around the world that you've witnessed the past 6 years.
Well, China, obviously, I think would be the head of the list right now. It's just our friends in China say that it's the worst persecution since the Cultural Revolution. Bob Fu is the president of China Aid. He's a close friend, and we work very closely with China Aid. He actually lives in Midland, Texas. And just this last week, this Chinese billionaire came out with a hit list of people that need to be assassinated and Bob was on that list. And so in Midland, Texas, you can look that up in news reports. And there have been hundreds of protesters who've come in by bus to Midland, Texas, to protest in front of Bob Fu's house. And so Bob and his whole family are right now living in a secure place, being protected by the FBI. So the Chinese reach is not just in China, but it's global. Obviously, Eritrea, in many ways, is in Africa, is one of the most abusive countries. North Korea, obviously, it's horrendous what's going on in North Korea now. Countries like Iran, about the only way that people can worship is in their own homes through satellite television. Even underground churches are seldom used there. We're working with the BWA to create a misery list of 9 countries where Baptists have work that have suffered from either war, religious persecution, hunger, famine, natural disasters, and so we've got a list, that Nigeria is the second on that list. Syria is the fourth on that list. India, increased religious persecution in India against Muslims and against Christians and other religious groups.
China is also not only against Christians, it's also against Muslims.
We have been very involved in the defense of the Uyghur Muslims in China. They're reliving the Holocaust right now today. But not only them, the Falun Gong have probably been persecuted more severely even than the Uyghurs. And so we recently had a Zoom call, our staff did, with about 10 key Falun Gong folks in the United States, to let them tell us their story so we can be advocates for them. So, whether it's the Rohingyas in Malaysia, in Myanmar, the Rohingya Muslims, or the Uyghur Muslims, or the Falun Gong, or the anti-Semitism going throughout Europe and even in our own country, we believe in standing up for the religious freedom for people of all faiths, and even those of no faith.
I think a day or so ago, I received an email from 21 Wilberforce that talked about the power and importance of the internet and the distribution of information on religious freedom and liberty into countries. Comment on that, and how are countries that want to restrict religious liberty or religious freedom and persecute these groups, what are they doing to try to stop that? What steps to block access to the internet and technology?
Well, China and Iran and those countries spend probably billions of dollars on creating firewalls that won't allow citizens to communicate with each other, nor will they allow them. You go to China today and you look up Tiananmen Square, and it would just show you a park with lakes and trees. It won't tell anything about the horrendous thing that happened there 20 years ago. There are already internet companies that have created ways to circumvent the internet firewall. We have met with them. We've seen it. It's been around for 10 years. And our country has not funded those kinds of, we're trying to make it a larger priority for our own country to stand for internet freedom. We just created a new site of several of us who have come together as a coalition to stand up for religious freedom. We think everybody ought to have access to truth, and we want to hear from them, not just so they can hear from us. We want to hear from them. They need to hear from each other. When something happens in Hong Kong, people in Beijing need to know about it. And so we think that we think it's the 21st century Berlin Wall. These firewalls, and we're working with the Lantos Foundation and others to fight for internet freedom.
Do you find troubling signs of anti-Semitism, in particular in areas of the United States as well as Europe?
Well, I think there's a lot of racism that we can see today in the United States, and it's horrific. And anti-Semitic racism is very much a part of that. The church, this is a tremendous opportunity for the church to step up and stand for racial equality and to fight against unjust laws that penalize people for their race or for their religion. And I don't think that we've always been at the front of that, but this is a great time for us to do that. But absolutely, we're seeing with the media and internet, these racist opinions can go rampant for people that otherwise would probably not have been heard. And so we need to stand up for love and justice. I'm looking right across my computer at a sign that I have up in my office. It says, "Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly." It's the Micah 6:8. You know, that's what we need to be doing in these dark days.
Amen to that. Uh, Final question in just a moment to answer. How can folks learn more about 2021 Wilberforce?
But go to our site. Just go 21wilberforce.org. Just the number 21wilberforce.org, our 21wfreedom.center. See what we're doing. Sign up for our alerts. Our alerts go out every 2 or 3 weeks, and they have action items. You know, opportunities to write your senator, write your congressman, or prayer items, so that I think every church ought to pray every Sunday. In one of their prayers, we need to mention the persecuted church. Hebrews 13:3 says, "Remember those who are in prison as though you're in prison with them." So financially, we have financial partners around the country. Your church every month helps support the work of standing with the persecuted through 21 Wilberforce. And John, we're so grateful for Selma Baptist Church and the way that you partner with us. We'd love to have you guys become our prayer partners. Sign up for our alerts, and we do prayers as well, that you can sign up for our prayers, and you receive those 3 or 4 times a week to pray with us.
Dr. Everett, thank you so much for your time. Godspeed. We will continue praying for you and for all the work that's being done with 21 Wilberforce and for the persecuted church. This is John Chowning with Campbellsville University for Dialogue on Public Issues. And let me encourage you to join us at Selma Baptist Church and Campbellsville University in supporting this organization and praying for and supporting the persecuted church and standing up for religious freedom and religious liberty for all people. Thank you and God bless.
Thank you.